Well, welcome to the Sunday recap on our Vine Talks podcast. My name is Dre Clark. I'm one of the pastors here at Grapevine's First Baptist Church, and I am joined with one of our teaching pastors, Jonathan Cook, who led us in week 2. You had 2 weeks back-to-back, filling in for Pastor Doug as he's been out on sabbatical, and led us through Jeremiah this week. So welcome to the podcast, Jonathan.
Thanks, appreciate it. And for anybody that watches this consecutively, these were filmed back-to-back weeks. This wasn't all filmed in one. I think I wore the same shirt last week as I did this week. I woke up this morning not even thinking about the podcast, funny enough. Yeah. And so
that would have been impressive. Like if you had planned both sermons, you could have filmed back-to-back.
Just done back-to-back. Yeah, that's not my personality, you know. But I did wash the shirt, so it smells good.
Yeah.
You know? So it's not, you know.
I'm glad. I personally appreciate that. No one else can smell it because it's all video. But yeah. Well, man, regardless of what shirt you're wearing, I thought you did a great job yesterday. So today's Monday, we're filming this, and great message. Go ahead and just give us a recap of what the message was about.
Yeah, so jumping into Jeremiah, last week was Isaiah, which was just a heavy book. Yeah. Jeremiah, then you jump into the weeping prophet. And so I started off just kind of covering about a weeping prophet, right? Yeah. Talking about Jeremiah, that's what he is known as. I mean, you ask most people, like, who is Jeremiah? Oh, he's the weeping prophet, right? And so I kind of started off with just there's bad news, which is there's suffering in this world. There is destruction. There's people that rebel against Christ. There's rebellion. There's all sorts of things that cause suffering. Yeah. And I addressed the floods that just happened last week. The airline, India airline, that 241 people passed away, and cancer's on the rise in young adults, and just the hopelessness that young adults feel. And so I kind of covered just all sorts of, there is suffering, and because of that, we're going to weep. Yeah. And so we can kind of relate to Jeremiah here. He went through a lot of trial in his ministry. So I kind of talked about that, how he was in ministry for, I think like 5 decades. And during that time, he saw very little almost like fruit that ever came from it. Like there was just a lot of rebellion that happened during his time in ministry. And but he kept going. And the reason why is because of the good news, which is part 2, which is because we do have hope. There is a good shepherd that is presented to us in Jeremiah. I was in Jeremiah 23, 1 through 6, and so the whole time I just kind of stuck to these 6 verses where we kind of saw all sorts of things that were happening, but ultimately, bad news or suffering, good news, we have hope, and we have hope in a good shepherd, and then in the righteous branch, which is just the prophecy of Jesus coming through the lineage of David, and who that is going to look like, which is he's going to be the good shepherd, and which now we know, and so
it's the gospel story. That's what I loved about we oftentimes think of the Old Testament as kind of this other version of God, this other version of faith, and different version. Yep. But it's the same thing. I mean, it's the idea of we are saved through grace, and we have this bad news that we live in, this broken reality. Yep. And God is the solution. Yeah. We are not the solution. So the Old Testament's kind of trying this. Can you keep the Mosaic Law, and is that going to bring the solution? And no, that doesn't work. It's looking to Christ. Christ is the one who comes and fulfills it. Right. But even in this Old Testament setting, you can see that. And I think you brought that out in Jeremiah really well. And I think it's important to remember that we feel it now. Well, they felt it then. If we go through suffering now, so we're connected, and we all need to put our eyes on that good news. And ultimately, that's Christ. That's what He's coming to bring. And so,
I think I even said that yesterday, which was, this morning we're going to read the Gospel in the Old Testament. We're going to see this story of brokenness, but God, right? Yeah. And so, I really enjoyed Jeremiah, and just the study, the side of it, and then be able to preach it yesterday.
It's not often, I don't hear too many messages from Jeremiah, so that was really good. Well, on that, so that was kind of the format. That's what you brought us through. Is there anything, if you as you're studying, anything that you would have gone a little bit deeper into if you had more time, or maybe it's something that you had to push out of your notes because it wasn't as too much in the weeds or something? What'd you leave on the table?
Yesterday I really wanted to focus on the hope, right? And so one that's just more my personality. Like I want to end with more of the joy, the optimism, right? And I think though if I could have had 5 more minutes, maybe 10 more minutes, I would have settled more into the weeping prophet, right? Which I covered, but I didn't relate that to then, but then Jesus in Luke 19 weeping over Jerusalem, and so I went into the story of Jeremiah and the evil kings that were happening, and the evil that was happening, but then the righteous leaders that were corrupt, and all those that are turning people away which then ultimately led to Jeremiah weeping over his people.
Yeah.
And then how do we then flip it over into Luke and we settle into, okay, Jesus faced similar, almost the exact same thing of just seeing his people and weeping. You know, I mean, they were seeing the witnessing of miracles happening, the teachings of Christ, but yet still not recognizing him as the Messiah and still rebelling, you know? And how does that relate today, right? I mean, we have all of Scripture that we can read. But yet people still rebel against the Messiah, right? So I think I would have just kind of gone more deep into that moment. And but I was running out of time, and so I switched ahead. You know, quickly switched over to but the hope.
And that's a good and I think that's the right place to land if you only got 30 minutes to leave there. But you remind me, we're talking about Jesus, and I don't know if you mentioned this in your message yesterday, but you just reminded me of it. Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus. Lazarus dies and he weeps. And I've always wondered, well, doesn't he know that he's about to go raise the guy from the and so why does he choose to engage in that way? And, there's actually even there's a translation discrepancy there, and some of the earlier manuscripts say that he was moved with indignation, like he's angry in that moment. And I've always wondered, like, why would he be angry? Maybe it's because this is not the way things are supposed to be. He's the creator of life, and he's seeing his friend die. He's seeing suffering. He's seeing all the brokenness of the world, and it makes him mad because that's not what he wants. That's not how he designed it. Jesus is the creator, and so he engages with in that moment. He steps into it, and then ultimately, though, he does bring them hope. Lazarus gets raised, and Jeremiah, ultimately, God says, I'm going to fix this. Jesus is going to come. It's going to be resolved. He is our living hope, and so while we're living in that suffering, we have that hope. And
that's right.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really cool
It's funny
thought.
how you just brought up Lazarus, too. We're completely off the cuff here. We didn't talk about this beforehand, right? And last night I was reading, we read Bible stories to Paisley, right? 4 years old. And she's just in that stage of asking a lot of questions. And we were talking about Jesus and Lazarus dying and what that looked like. And man, she was just asking amazing questions about that, right? But deep questions. And so I was able to tie in yesterday's sermon, just like what you just did, right? And just back into that story, but then be able to take that conversation and lead it with a 4-year-old is hilarious. But also just cool. Anyway, so
it doesn't make sense of the suffering, but it does help us. Back to your point you said yesterday was, we have a Savior who knows what it's like. We know Hebrews. We have a high priest who can relate. He gets it. He understands that brokenness. And he's going to be the solution, but he also enters into it with us. And so, great reminder. Well, we got time for one more quick question. And I want to bring up. You said something in your opening illustration, which I thought was really relatable for a lot of people. Which is you talked about. There's only been a few times in your life you had that like deep gut cry with your dog. And so. And I think that's really true a lot of times. Whenever I've been in church my whole life really, and churches aren't often seen as a place where, at least in its normal function, where lament is and crying, those deep kind of things, is really like embraced and kind of happens. And so we almost kind of like run away from it. And so you got Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. I always like to teach that over 40% of the Psalms are lament Psalms. I think even about half of those are this corporate lament. So just kind of as you were thinking through this, as you were in Jeremiah, what do you think is the place of lament in the Christian life, and why do you think that we like to avoid it? We like to get to that hope really quick. Why do we move past that? Just kind of some thoughts on that.
I think talking about me personally, right, and because I can only really talk about that, and how does that apply to others, right? It's hard for me to be vulnerable, right? Like that's difficult for me. I see myself as
most people, right?
As a man, as a leader, a shepherd. Like I see myself as somebody that should be leading, and you can't have a leader that's weeping or it's like, but that's not true. But that's where I go internally is one, just it's hard for me to be vulnerable, and I think it's hard for people in general just to be vulnerable. I think it's also, the natural instinct for most is to be more optimistic, right? We don't want to settle into the emotion of low, right?
Defeatism.
Yes, we don't want to settle there. We always want to leave there more encouraged, or leave there on a higher note. We want to leave there with the more the hope side rather than the defeat, right? And so I don't know, man. That's a great question. I think just for me though, personally, I may departmentalize a lot of things, right, which is not healthy, but I think whenever it comes to just Christians as a whole, we don't want to be seen as broken. We want to be seen as the redeemed, the celebratory side of Christianity, right?
Yeah, which I think that's really relatable. A lot of people, that is why we want Christ. That's our hope. The scriptures talk about our hope being really the anchor of our faith, right? It's the core of it. Yeah. But yeah, I think that I relate with you too, that we live in a world, we live in even a church culture where vulnerability is seen as weakness, and I think that what's interesting is, this book, this Jeremiah, like we have a leader, we have a prophet, and that really is, he's known as the weeping prophet. And I think most of us wouldn't sign up for that job description, but I think it's good to remember that there is a place for that in our life. And maybe we do need to get to the hope and we need to get the resurrection, but we maybe don't need to go too fast. I love, whenever we got here, we used to do this kind of Good Friday experience, and I think it's just sitting in that moment before you get to that resurrection, and there's something good about remembering that there is a reason that Jesus is coming. The more you can focus on the problem, the more you appreciate the solution. But I also think there's a side where you go too much and you can get, like you said, defeatism, bogged down. And so it's a balancing act. But I think that Scripture, Jeremiah gives us a model for that.
And I think it would be healthy. We see why he was weeping is because he's weeping at the brokenness of people, right?
Yeah, not for my own self, not for
correct. And so I think it's a great reminder for us as Christians of, look at the brokenness of the world. Look at the sinful nature of this world. Look at our family, our friends, our people, our community, our state, our nation, the world, and how does our
compassion?
Heart, that's right. But then let that compassion then fuel us to go and yes, have the hope of Christ, which is why we're going. But I think it's a great reminder in Jeremiah, and then like I said in Luke, even Jesus looking over his people and weeping just because. The brokenness.
That's right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, great message. That's all the time we have for today for the podcast. So thanks again for the recap on everything. We'd love to invite our listeners to join us on Sunday as we continue through this series, really going through different books of the Bible and kind of tracing this hope, tracing this living hope of Jesus and this divine narrative. And so you can join us at 9:15 on a Sunday morning for life groups and 10:30 for a message. And until then, we hope you have a great week and hope to see you back next week here for the podcast.
That's right.
Jonathan maybe will be wearing a different shirt next time. And so
maybe, or
we'll
3 weeks in a row.
Maybe 3 weeks in a row. Keep it going. But thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of the week. See ya.